Hello, fine people. How wonderful to be with you today. I invite you all to take a breath with me. I'd like to start by actually addressing the question, can we know our myth? And I would like to draw on what Mr. Miller said yesterday about the theory and mything, or maybe not mything. I'd like to use the image of a magnifying glass or a lens. We all are familiar with the metaphor, what lens are you seeing this through? What lens of perception? And I want to remind you that when you have a lens, when you have a magnifying glass, if you hold it at the right angle, at the right time, you can direct that light that's creating the optical image, and you can actually make tinder burn. And you can feel that heat. You don't need to ask if it's real, and you don't need to ask what it is, you know. To create that kind of intelligence or consciousness is definitely an embodied practice also, as you said. But I think that when you really are affecting a change in someone's energy or in someone's thoughts, that sort of is that fire burning inside someone. You're sharing myth. For example, this setting here today, I think, is the embodiment of the practice of mythology. A small group, people gathered, and really being able to go into the mind and the stories and see how we're thinking about this. The transmission of world-creating imagery is as seeds spawning from yawning gaps in our imaginal worlds. And our experience is created in contemplation and conversation, incongruity, thought, overlap, contrast, verbalization, speech, more contemplation. I'd like to use another image as a tool here, because I think images are one thing that are in the mythologist or mythographer's toolbox. And it's just, you know, you can see how it fits or doesn't fit. There's plenty of ways that it doesn't fit. But I'd like to suggest that the West, as we know, Babylon, Greece, all the way, I would say the West is like a fist. And you can do a lot with that fist. You can grasp. The power to grasp is immense. And you can fight. You can punch. And you can do all sorts of really cool things. As we learn Eastern and Oceanic and African and Australian philosophy and all of these things, pretty much anything that isn't the industrialism and the occupation of these center-focused Western forces, I would like to contend is like a baseball glove. Okay? So you've got the fist of the West, and you've got the baseball glove of the East. And when you have them both together, then you can play baseball. You can't play baseball without a glove. It'll hurt your hand. You won't be able to catch it. It's something a little bit extra. It's something that you get once you already have the fist. If you slip your left hand into that baseball glove, you're suddenly an individual on a new playing field. You can completely interact with the whole world in this way. Everybody's on different, on your teams, but everybody's playing the game. And so sometimes you're at bat, sometimes you're the umpire, sometimes you're out in left field. It's not always the same. Sometimes you're in the dugout. But we can pay attention in these ways. So I'd like to draw on a few examples from around the world to bring kind of an international relations, global perspective, which also relates those perspectives to the individual. Many questions have persisted throughout the ages, even having been considered far and wide. Why are we here? How did we get here? What is the meaning of life? These are the questions my dad told me all people ask. But in my experience of how people are presently interpreting the world, the main questions of mythology today are more like, how did it get this way? And what are the possibilities? Two examples demonstrate the globe of my global consideration. A quote from the introduction of a paper I took from a history class I took at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. The conclusion of the class was, in terms of historiography, all history is written from the ruler's point of view during apartheid, so discovering what happened is at least partly a process of recovering stories from popular memory. That's mythology. Social history and biography. There's no single authority who determines what events are privileged or included in education over others. This is from that paper. Any investigation which seeks to shake a golden ore of truth out of its flash pan is engaging in a philosophical quest that predates the Common Era. The concept of expressing the truth is relatively simplistic in that it begs only to be a perfect reflection of things. The truth would presumably be objective and equally accessible by all parties. Nevertheless, the truth of reality can only be expressed in relation to the reality of someone's experience, and therefore can only be realized subjectively, despite the fact that it's still universally true. The elusive nature of the truth is at the heart of the issue in the South African case of uncovering the truth what happened during and as the causes of apartheid. The task of exposing this truth was given to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu in 1994. The breadth of the Truth and Reconciliation Project extends into many dimensions, including psychological, historical, forensic, legal, judiciary, and political. The historical dimension is relevant as a separate category because all arguments and discussions about any of the dimensions contribute to the shaping of history at speed. History, in turn, determines the picture of South Africa those very scholars are mapping and analyzing. These maps and analyses reflect and influence possibilities for societal development in the South African present. Therefore, while history is a reality to be discovered, it must also be considered in its capacity as a tool. The authors surveyed in this paper, available online, make a variety of arguments which include topics such as the ongoing nature of the process of reconciliation, the evolution of truth and reconciliation committees around the world, the role of truth and reconciliation in the transition to democracy and debates between amnesty and justice. All can be seen as both describing and shaping some aspect of history. That they are doing so in relation to truth makes them interesting studies of what is conceived to be important with reference to history in the future. So apartheid was overthrown, and they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, institutionalized. Contrast demonstrates this situation, revealing our relative location in an archetypally similar historical vein. To create that contrast, I take you to the islands of Hawaii during the same period as the beginnings of separation and apartheid in South Africa. One image renders the scene, a statement. I, Liliuokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government of and for this kingdom. That I yield to the superior force of the United States of America, whose Mr. Plenipotentiary, His Excellency John L. Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the said provisional government. Now, to avoid any collision of arms and perhaps loss of life, I do, under this protest and impelled by said forces, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representative and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands. Obviously, we did not have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for what happened in Hawaii, and of course, these inflections of coercive military presence have happened all over North and South America, the islands, Australia, Asia, even Europe, as well as the aforementioned colonization of Africa. Though the TRC of the new South African government was necessarily cruder than an ideal version of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it is exemplary of the archetype, of an expression of the archetype behind the idea that the truth will set you free. And as quoted, truth commissions evoke high expectations of the power of truth. Now, certain philosophers of indigenous people have contributed to what this means, and I believe that it is to the philosophers of the indigenous people that we can really learn from them how they overcame this and what it is that is possible for us to do in the case of the fact that there is no truth and reconciliation for a lot of Native people around the whole world, and they have to come to grips with this. There's two philosophers that I would like to draw on. One is Oswald Giambra. He wrote the Cannibalist Manifesto. It's called Manifesto Antropófago from Brazil in 1923, and in which he says, cannibalism alone unites us. We absorb what we pay attention to or are surrounded by it. We digest it and we make it our own. It's much like the Aztec cosmos' concept of heat and digestion of the universe. We take it all in and it's ours. Also drawing from India for their indigenous philosophy, they have a philosophy called the secret of self-recognition, which says we may regard the story conscious of the adaptations of our awareness. Conscious that we are embedded in a fabric whose material bears a womb-like potency to become the gross phonemes of the words and sentences that build our experience of the world. It's all about listening to the stories of these indigenous philosophers, of all people. Everyone is indigenous is my argument for this story. But these words build strongholds and fortresses, and this is how we shape our consciousness and our mythological perspective, and are able to be intelligent about our intent instead of trying to be disruptive, or trying to do something good, but then it actually being disruptive. The other philosophy I would like to draw off of is Antoine Lembetti. of South Africa in the 1950s. His philosophy was saying we can consciously select from all ideas in the whole world without restriction. It doesn't matter where you're born or when. You don't have to subscribe to philosophy. You don't have to subscribe to English or psychology. You don't have to be married to any of these ideas. You can learn them. He was saying that civilization is an entire human project. Everyone came from Africa. And the fact that then colonization came back to Africa and expected everyone to define their own identity in relation to these new colonizers' identity, he's saying, well, we don't have to be like Westerners in order to like make contributions to their discussions. We can draw from the East and from the West. We can be our own distinct third thing. We have a right to exist in this world. And that's what I would like to say for the individual, is that the individual has the right to draw from all these things in the world. And that they can add to their myth, and that they can use other people's struggle for freedom as part of their own story and empowerment, and they can locate themselves in that sense. So that's what I would say.